Cool. Well, Chris, appreciate you hopping on today.
Of course.
And long time no see.
Yeah,
Not Hamptons, not the Hamptons in New York we get today, but give everyone your background, what
sure.
you're up to, who you are, and a little of what you're doing at Solyco, and then we'll dive a little bit deeper into it.
Yeah, sounds great. It's kind of one of those like, how far do you want to go back, right? So I played baseball at a fairly high level, played in college, was on the Olympic team. I was a pitcher, got hurt. And so it was an interesting kind of pivotal point, right, in my life where like I thought I was going to go play pro baseball, right? And now I've got to figure out what to do. Graduated with a degree in economics. Didn't want to sit behind a cube. That just was not any bit my personality. So ended up in sales, which was a great opportunity. And then ended up in finance, same in sales, but I was a wholesaler. So selling mezz debt and growth and income funds, but cut my teeth during 2007 through 2009, the real estate crisis. And I was selling real estate deals. So that was fun. One of our largest clients at the time invited me out to California. So I moved at the end of 2009. It was great. I relocated from Williamsburg, Virginia. I went to William and Mary to Newport Beach in California, and it's beautiful out here, but very high cost of living. And the company went BK about 75 days after I moved out here. So I'm marooned in a beautiful place and going, what the heck am I going to do? I ended up starting a consulting firm. I met my wife a few months after I moved to California, and she was, in biz dev and marketing for law firms. She started her own firm in 12, doing that. I started my own marketing agency actually in 2015. So had this consulting firm. I was doing a lot of work for startups, other companies. I was in the space, and I saw this gap, right, in marketing around conversion rate optimization and high intent media buying. That really wasn't being done in the same way we think about it today as like a tent pole for growth. And so, we worked with brands like Travis Mathew and Experian and the entire UC system. It was an amazing opportunity to like really go deep into companies and start understanding how scale truly works. Well, sometimes you got to eat your own dog food. And I had through a mutual friend and an introduction to these five guys who had just started a CBD company. And so I joined as a partner beginning of 2017. And so if we think about that timing, especially in the CBD industry, it wasn't like it is now where you find it everywhere, right? The second farm bill hadn't passed. And so we started building that company. We were, direct to consumer because really that's what I knew. I knew how to scale digitally native vertical brands. And we started that beginning of 17. By 19, we had 120 employees. We were in 17 countries. We were, let's see, the second largest CBD brand behind Charlotte's Web in the world. It was an absolute MBA in parabolic scale, right? We were selling, I don't know, north of 55, $60 million worth of product at, $91 a pop. It was quite insane online. And it was a wonderful time. But what you end up learning, because that was 2019 was our peak, what you end up learning is products like CBD are discretionary spend, right? They're a replacement for other things that are readily available in the market. And there's, no arguing that's a wonderful product. It's just from a dosage perspective, more expensive. And so you find that when people can sit like a crumpled piece of laundry on their couch, not having to drive their kids to school, not having to go to work the same way, they're a little less concerned about their fitness, right? We saw it kind of split quite large during that period. And then number two, there's a lot of trepidation about the capital markets and what was going to happen if people were going to have jobs. And so we watched parabolic compression back down the other way. So it was a very interesting time. We ended up selling that business to a public traded company in August of 21. It was a great exit. Fully available. The company was called Balanced Health Botanicals that we sold. You can look it up online. We sold for 75 million. And then at the same time, and I'll put these kind of bumpers up in the story of the beginning of 17 to August of 21. So this period of 4 years was unbelievably hectic. It was awesome scaling this company. I still had my agency, which I ended up merging with my wife's, that she's the managing partner of, called Parcon. But we also decided to co-found a liquor distillery in Huntington Beach with another couple. We took the same playbook we had at CV Distillery and we scaled that up. We raised 3.7 million for that as well and moved to a 25,000 square foot facility. We made vodka, gin, bourbon rum, canned cocktails, spiked seltzers. We had a full private label offering for other brands. It was an amazing 2 years. And then we were able to sell that in April of 21. So the interesting thing about that real quick is trying to sell two companies simultaneously while managing two companies simultaneously, one in California and one in Denver. Do not recommend. Do not at all recommend. It's extremely difficult. On top of that, my wife and I had sold another skincare brand in the CBD space back in 2019, and we had sold it to our own company. So I like to say we had 3 exits, but everyone make their own decision. They wanted to build a portfolio of brands. And then also, because I'm a glutton for punishment, a buddy of mine that I went to college with, we raised 2 funds in the cannabis space in 18 and 19 respectively. Standard, venture deals, but we were not touching the underlying commodity. We were touching I call it the picks and shovels. So ERP systems, FinServe, analytics companies, accessory companies, things that weren't tied to the underlying state-by-state nature of the commodity. Because commodity pricing, as many know, when it's a new market, you're going to have low supply, right? Think economics, low supply, high demand. You're going to get great pricing. Then you're going to have the next season or harvest. In our world, you're going to have overstock of inventory and very low pricing. And so playing that game, being vertically integrated, was not anything we really were interested in doing or investing in as new states came online. So we raised those 2 funds during that time. Those 2 funds still exist. We've had some exits out of them, which is great. Certainly had some ones that didn't do so well as well. But really, at the end of the day, those funds continue to return capital to our investors. What was interesting is in 2017, as I was kind of digging in and working with the CBD company, I joined this group called Alder, ALDER, like the tree. It was based here in California, but we have members all over the country. And it's really about generational leadership, the idea of living your legacy today, right? It's really what it comes down to. There's a great quote, a great Greek proverb, I'll say. It's, the world's a better place when old men plant trees whose shade they'll never enjoy, right? And so it always sticks with me, this whole idea of something more, right? Something in the future. And there's also this great book by David Brooks. He's a commentator. It's called Road to Character. And the idea is, which is more important, your personal CV, and professional CV, excuse me, like what you did for a living, or your eulogy CV, what people say about you when you die. And most people say, well, my eulogy CV is the most important. And it's like, well, then the next logical question is, what are you doing today to live that, right? So, all right, that's all there. But at the same time I joined in 17, this gentleman by the name of John Garcia joined as well. And John and I hit it off, became friends. He had just moved to Michigan from Southern California, and he had just started this firm called Solyco Capital. And so we got to know each other. They ended up investing in the liquor distillery. So he watched these things over a 5-year period go full cycle. And it was one of those where at the end of my last exit in August of 21, he invited me to join as a senior equity partner at Solyco. And so that's where I am now. That's what we do. What's really unique about Solyco is it's unlike any venture firm really that I've ever worked with or raised funds for or been kind of raised capital by. And it's unique in their process. And I can go through the long story, but when you look at venture, you look at a 2 and 20 model traditionally. We don't do that. We really operate within our companies from a very early stage. And so there's 11 of us senior partners and about 40 staff. That alone tells you that's a quite large firm. And so the next question I get is, well, what's your AUM? And it's not necessarily the answer they expect, which is, we're at about $325, $330 million in total AUM. That wouldn't carry the FTE costs that I just mentioned. And so when you look at that on a standard 2 and 20, when you look at that, there's really 3 of us partners that are out doing capitalization, sourcing, power brokering between our ecosystem, finding partnerships, really just kind of looking at that. Now, all the partners touch all the companies, but realistically, a lot of the other partners in the staff and our leaders are working inside of these companies, right? On what we call secondment, their second job, right? So think management consulting. That's really what they're in there doing. These are ex-COOs, chief strategy officers, chief financial officers, accounting teams, marketing teams that are going in and helping them drive value during this formidable time. And 100% of 100% less expensive than going out and hiring FTEs where you have to pay prevailing wage in the market, like LA for a chief revenue officer, which is typically the position I would sit when I started these companies, is a $350,000 a year job, plus carrying costs, plus stock options. That's a big number. Well, you can put our team in and do that work with proven operators much quicker, right? Without the burden of keeping them on. Now, that sounds bad because you're saying taking away jobs, but we're dealing and being a fiduciary of investor capital. And it's important that we need to push that forward. So go faster on less fuel for our portfolio. And that's really what we focus on. And a lot of companies, as they scale, they grow, they may change their core focus just over time. It happens when you start and you keep pushing. The person you hire today, 18 months from now, might not be the person you need any longer. And you're sometimes stuck with legacy tenured FTs. So it gives this time of push before you need and have identified the actual leader in-house to go. What's also unique about our firm is we don't have a thesis around a specific industry, right? We like investing from seed through B, but we also are seed through B, but we don't actually look from a vertical perspective and say we only do AI or we only do industrial manufacturing or we only do sports tech, right? We bet on amazing founders and amazing platforms that we see and understand how to scale. And that's really our differentiator compared to, I think, a lot of the venture space. So I'll kind of turn it back over to you if that works.
No, it was great, Chris. And I think the next place to go, there's a million different interesting things on that, but you started to foray a little bit into sports over the last couple of years within Solyco and the portfolio. You can go through them if you want, but what are you seeing as the opportunity? How are you evaluating the space? Obviously, as a generalist, you see everything. What's interesting to you in this space that said, okay, obviously you're a former athlete, you come from it, but okay, now we're gonna put real capital. We're gonna bring your model into the space as well. What's sort of the what we'll call it the thesis around that for you guys?
Yeah, what's interesting is I see a lot of minority sports deal teams and leagues, especially as we kind of go to this more, I don't want to say global sports view, but cricket, padel, all these kind of new, I don't want to say new, but new sports in the US, right? Because we were really focused on our big sports here, but you're seeing this emergence come in. And I think everyone's trying to replicate what happened with pickleball, right? It became this just kind of cult hit all of a sudden, and now it's everywhere. And certainly there's these amazing new sports that are coming in, but have some limitations. I think they're interesting. It is tough for us, at least, to get behind and truly understand how they're going to scale, right? Because at the end of the day, what we've seen, at least for US sports, in my opinion, is they've become media properties more than anything, right? They are these huge media networks. And I don't know how we get to that size and scale because pickleball, yes, has taken off, but how have the pickleball leagues truly done, right? I have a friend who owns one of the teams and certainly it's gone up in value and exposure, but that feels like a very long run investment, right? And a lot of times a vanity investment inside of a portfolio. Again, as I understand, they used to be great tax shelters back in the day, and now they're for-profit media companies. And so how do you look at a new league or new team that way? And I think that becomes an interesting discussion. There's also a lot in the recovery tech that I am fascinated by. I'm friends with Jim, the CEO at Hyperice. We did not invest, not because it's a bad company. We just didn't invest in that and have the opportunity. But you look at what they're doing. You see the partnership they just did with Nike. You see some of the amazing things that they have from a product perspective, and it's all around recovery. And that it does kind of hit a thread for me, right? Being a past athlete, being injured, I look at all the technology, even down to stuff that we're getting off topic, but stem cells and all of these things that we didn't have, right? We just had cortisone shots and Advil and an ice bath, right? Now you have these amazing technologies for recovery that maybe that would have helped me instead of having to go get surgery. And it may have been preventative in nature to help recover. And so that's a fascinating thing. For us, we've made 3 investments in the space so far. One is a data play. And it's called OSDB, Online Sports Database, co-founded by Aaron Rodgers, Ryan Rotman, and Nate Ravey. It's a big data lake play, mapping out the entire athlete from philanthropic ventures to different endorsements they've made, different endorsements they have, different investments they have made, plus their contract value, right? Everything holistically 360. So you think of that from a data lake perspective. But number two, there's a subscription service for brands and agents to come in and actually find out who represents them, right, on the two-sided ecosystem, and what again, deals they may have or deals they don't. They might not have a sneaker deal or a clothing deal or apparel deal. It becomes very interesting. We like to think everyone's represented by CAA or WME or, you know, the Boris Corps of the world. But there are many, I'll call them, not to be disrespectful, but like tier 2, tier 3 athletes that are pro athletes still, that do not have anyone but maybe their cousin or their friend managing them and don't have that strength behind them. And this ends up being this marketplace to help. You can also see a world as we're building it where you get gambling insights off of that data lake. So, you know, I always use this one as an example for visiting quarterbacks going to Buffalo during a snowstorm, right? Like, how do they fare over the last 10, 20 years? But just in snowstorms, right? Sure, you go build a pivot table and try and figure that out. And maybe someone has done that on Sportsline and other places, but you can basically ask it in natural language, right? Think of the LLMs and be able to get that already pre-built. So it becomes a very interesting media property as we look at it as well from a traffic perspective. The second one we invested in was a company called Fluid Logic. The question I ask as I talk about Fluid Logic is how, like, so first of all, the entire world is chronically dehydrated. The minute you need to drink water, you're already too late. You're already in a state of dehydration. But you think about it for solving things like, what does a race car driver do when they're going 200 miles an hour in a 100-degree car, right? And have to be in there for hours. Traditionally, it was ram a straw through a helmet to a igloo cooler. And today, after Fluid Logic, it's a pod, motor, and board and water containment system that flows up over their comms mic, and they have a button on a steering wheel. That's automatically here in the future going to be tied to their biometrics, right? And so it will tell them immediately when and how. And you can see as the company continues to evolve, you see the next thing going, what can they do on bike, on motorcycle, right? Anything that's a helmet sport. And then you go further than that and say, what can that be if you could wear it and go hiking and running and do it for practice, right? Because what does that look like for the military? What does that look like in all of these industrial applications, right? When you look at it, the TAM is everyone who drinks water, but you've got to convince them to drink in a different way than this, right? This is your biggest competitor. And so we look at it and say there is this kind of wide open evergreen space that you can come in, this blue ocean, come in with some pushback, but tell people they don't know how to drink and rework how to get people actually hydrated. Not only active people doing active things, but generally this idea of hydration is a big topic as we move forward. And then really the last one and most recent, and certainly you guys have heard of this one, is AI.io. We led their Series A. We closed that deal, what was it now, 2-3 weeks ago when we saw you guys at Hampton Tech Week. Fascinating use of AI. I do a lot of speaking, and I think I was on stage a half a dozen, if not more times last year saying we'll never invest in an AI company. And my quick feeling on that, and by the way, at this moment, right, that wasn't like a ever, but at this moment, and really what that came down to was, well, I'm not smart enough to know what's a product versus a feature in that space. And what I mean by that is when you look at the LLMs, these models, they're amazing. They're coming out. There's a huge barrier to build them. And then you have all the middleware, which is really where there's a ton of investment activity and a ton of funds being raised. And so when you look at it and say, is this a true product that's going to sit on top and be able to be meaningful, or is this just a feature that this large model has not gotten to in their product roadmap yet? And so what you end up finding is these funds, especially in the AI space, will make tons of bets, traditional portfolio theory that venture runs on, right? That 40% are going to fail, another 40% are going to be, singles, doubles, and triples, to use a baseball analogy, and then there's going to be 2 that carry the entire fund. For us, since we don't raise funds in that way, we go towards specific companies or bring a few companies together, pre-identified. That's not for us where we need to play. Number 2, most of these companies, just because they have a .ai appended to the back of their URL, start at $100 million minimum pre-revenue, just an idea. The quantum of companies that go from $100 million pre-money to sell for what we need for our investors, thinking of that 10, 12x as a return of capital, right? Our target numbers, That means they're going to sell for over $1 billion. How many companies go from 100 in a seed stage to 1.2 billion? Very few. But if you look at our thesis and go in the 25, $30 million range, how many companies sell for 250 to 350 million? That number is much higher. And so when we look at the return for our investors, we need to be prudent that, that may not be the best bet from a total return perspective and becomes almost a vanity investment in of itself, unless you pick that perfect winner. And so for us, that wasn't a place we're going to play. With that said, through our mutual friend, Steve Sabo, who I got to know over the last year, he kept pinging me going, you got to take a look at something. And I saw the .ai at the back of the URL and said, no, thanks, man. Hard pass. And he's like, just please take a look. And again, kind of the power of this Hampton Tech Week, right? I finally did, was blown away. Really what AI.io does is democratize scouting. So we're not talking about a language model. So I still hold true that we're not investing in that. But what you're looking at is a way that individual athletes in youth sports all the way up can submit videos and be benchmarked against maybe the best striker from Chelsea or the best player in X sport. And it becomes an amazing scouting tool. Now, at first you might be didn't know scouting was broken, but it's a very manual process. People have to go watch a child play. And for me, who was scouted and had many talks with teams before I went to college, there were guys with, the radar guns standing behind you pitching every time, and they'd come. And then there were games they wouldn't come, and they were always running around. Well, what ends up happening is they can only see and hear, even our digital age, about so many athletes. What this ends up doing is not only helping them do their job more effectively, but think about places like Senegal. Think of like places like India during COVID where they couldn't send scouts out. Well, they ended up doing a beta test with it, and there were hundreds of individuals, youth soccer players, that submitted videos, even ones that had never played any organized sports. And 17 of them were flown out to try out and do development deals with Premier League teams. Like that changed 17 individuals' lives from India. One submitted it on a community town phone, right? Uploaded the video. You start thinking about what this changes. Then you think about the combine for the NFL, or you think about building training facilities for development, because yes, this is identifying youth, but it's also something to be identified through the development chain with minor league sports up and through. And it becomes a very interesting opportunity for democratizing scouting, but also helping development. And then you look at what other applications can be used. They're working with NASA on a pre and post flight launch. You can work with the military on development. There's so many applications of being able to use this technology that we were blown away. And so when you look at some of the licensing agreements they're in talks with, you look at some of the licensing agreements they've already secured, it was an absolute, and we feel humbled to even have the opportunity to get in. And that's when you know it's a special company, when you feel like, yes, we want to be here, we want to play with you, we want to support you, but also, holy smokes, this is an amazing opportunity that we get to be a part of, and just a fantastic team as well.
No, I couldn't.
And so, go ahead.
Let me chime in here real quick, because I'm super curious, right? Like, as you sort of break down these three pockets. There's obviously the company and the trajectory, but as the asset class of sports continues to expand, we're watching new innovation continue to come from all different angles. But with that, founders are looking to raise capital, right? For someone that sits in your seat that doesn't run a traditional fund model, I'm curious, what advice would you give to founders that are actively fundraising right now, and like what sort of sticks out that you would send downstream to try and help bridge the gap from founder to either seed or sort of that Series A investment?
Yeah. Know your numbers, run, right? And I realize that sounds very pedantic or rudimentary, but really know your numbers, really understand your plan. Number two, be myopically focused on one vertical or one sport or one thing. Now, I just said on the other side of my mouth all this opportunity in the Series A for AI.io, right? But they are myopically focused on soccer today, and can show and have had talks with what it can be in the future. What ends up happening, and it becomes this kind of, I'll call it education investment, right? That companies have to do, is they say, well, my product can serve everyone. right? Even Fluid Logic that I mentioned, right? They started in motorsports, but they got a foothold in motorsports before they went out into new areas. Unfortunately, a lot of companies, a lot of startups say we can serve everyone and start building teams to show. And the opportunity cost of not going, a mile deep versus an inch wide in one industry can cause you to burn more money than needed on team members, can burn more money than needed in resources, especially if there's development involved, right? So I like seeing a really laser focused approach to what problem they're solving in one industry and why they can dominate. And then as they scale, share where it can also go and show a roadmap to that, but in the future, not today. And so that I think is a very big piece. Certainly there's a lot of pieces in diligence, but like the core understanding that time is a resource that we can't change, right? We can raise more money in the future, right? You get great market signals, you understand what you're doing, you've built a thesis, we can go raise more money. But time is the one thing we can't. So if you spread out everything on this time, you are going to end up running short of the capital you've already raised. So really, for me, at the end of the day, it is how focused this team is on what they're trying to solve, right? And then secondarily, do you truly understand the entire marketplace, right? There's this great GP from Benchmark Capital. I'm drawing a blank on his name. But he goes, if you're selling a sailboat company, most founders come and start telling you about the rigging, and they start telling you about the beam and all the fancy stuff inside the boat, right? And how the sail works and all this. The really good entrepreneurs, the really good founders tell you about the wind, and they focus only on the wind. Because if the wind is good enough, every single boat will take flight. But if there is no wind, then that fancy paperweight you have floating there is not going to do anything. And it becomes a really good kind of analogy, and it stuck with me. I really wish I could give him credit. I apologize. But selling the wind, selling the true market and why this has the opportunity to be the big next platform in whatever industry, I think is very important. It also shows that the founder entrepreneur truly understands the market they're going after.
No, I appreciate the insight there. That's super helpful. And, I think that's something that, as we watch, even seasoned C-suite folks that have been in the industry forever, raising capital is its own venture while still trying to mature your baby and, grow the business. And so I think those little nuggets are super helpful.
Well, one thing, if you don't mind me adding on,
please.
As I mentioned, I've done a few startups, right? In actuality, I have probably more gravestones that you have to walk over before you actually see the exits, but those aren't the things that people like talking about, right? I'm happy to, but at the end of the day, a CEO's job, a founder's job, is to always be fundraising. Now, you can talk about culture, you can talk about having vision, you can talk about really, managing a team, but ultimately, if it's your idea, you're the founder, or you're one of the partners, someone has to have the responsibility to go out and be the evangelist in the marketplace constantly. When you raise money because you need it, you are behind, and it's not that you've lost leverage. Actually, you have lost leverage, just to be frank, right? Because you need capital. But more importantly, you have lost time, right? We're back to the time again. And so if you're constantly fundraising, constantly getting people excited and constantly telling them there might be a raise coming up and constantly showing momentum, not only to individuals that are already possibly in your cap stack, but showing ones that you want, right? Because part of good fundraising in my mind, right, is the drip, right? Like, keep me up to date on what's going on. Even if I've said no, it might be no today, right? And I might be really interested and say, well, keep sharing with me or come back to me when you guys are here so that I can take a look, because now I see enough product market fit or enough signals. So whether or not it's me or whether or not it's someone you haven't met but you want, you send the email, you get no response. By the way, that happens a lot. I'm guilty of it as well, just because, we all are busy. But I might see it one day and go, oh, wait, what? Let me look at that. And then search you by name and see you've been updating me this whole way, and I'll look at that momentum and then I'll give you a buzz, right? Or send you an email back. I think that type of prudency around fundraising, right? Because ultimately it's your responsibility as the CEO to get it in, is important. And it's usually, you're dating, right? You're trying to find people who are going to come in and believe in you. And, sometimes that's with some persistence. So being persistent, smiling through the pain of, getting kicked every day, because no one bats 100% when they're raising capital. But letting no be a friendly word and continuing to smile and move on.
Yeah. And I got two quick questions, Chris, and we'll try to get out and for questions at 4:40. But the first is on some of those gravestones, if there was any little things that led to those, or things that could have been avoided that other people, if they just had experience, they wouldn't follow that path. Or you have any quick examples or insight from there?
Yeah. I kind of mentioned it before and said I was talking about industries, or so, industry verticals within a company. It was just because you have a great idea right now, understand how much time you can spend doing it, right? So we did the distillery, we were doing the CBD. I had an idea for another, kind of supplement company that we were going to create, and I could take the same model. So I thought it was going to be low labor, right? It was not. It's a new company. It's a new thing you have to do. It's a new everything. And it was one of those I was going to bootstrap, and then I thought about raising capital for it. Then I went back to bootstrapping. Then I'm paying people who don't they have the vision, right? They knew what we were trying to build, but they still needed someone in there as a leader. But I'm in Denver 4 days a week, and then coming back to raise capital, do everything for the distillery. A lot of it was not understanding my own time limitations, because the idea was really good and timely, but I couldn't dedicate the time to it. Right. And so that became a huge factor in the failure of a few of those. And then the other one I'll say is, just because it's an idea that you have and solves a problem you have, doesn't mean many others share the same problem at scale. Right. You hear these great stories and it's romanticized, right? Like the best startups are you solving a problem that you have, and you never know how many people might have that as well. Well, sure, that's a great way. And I love those stories, like all these companies that were grown in a garage, right? These are amazing lore and stories, and we feel great about them. But ultimately, some people don't have the same problems that you have, right? And just because it's solved for you doesn't mean that way is going to be for them. So I'd say between those two, that was the biggest things. I have these great ideas that aren't always great.
I know we touched on a few of them earlier, and this is the last question we always ask everyone, but trends in sports in general, you have an eye on, that interest you that other people should be paying attention to over the next couple of years?
Yeah, I think, back to where we haven't made an investment, but I see a lot is the emerging sports. I think there's gonna be a lot more, and how to make those into media properties. I think what you saw with the UFC and the WWE is interesting. You have like traditional media storylines, villains, good guys, the whole thing, right? And an entertainment company mixed with the UFC in one property house. I realize they're different, but you start seeing the UFC shifting to that type of storytelling, right? I think that at the end of the day, sports is amazing entertainment. And I think you're going to see a lot more, at least for my mind, as they become media assets, like true media companies. They're going to need to make media type decisions around storytelling. And I think you're going to start seeing, what ended up being the WWE fake wrestling, right? Have an impact on more and more sports. You can already see a lot of the framing, certainly in the NBA and the NFL, on, who are the good guys? What do they call them? The heels and the heroes, right? Like, who are those? And people get that label and start really going down that to build their persona. So I think you're going to see a lot more of that. Now that that's an investable trend, I think that's a very interesting way things will evolve. Recovery tech, I think, is going to continue to go more and harder. And I really enjoy that as well. I think it's a good place to put dollars and bet on. Certainly, like I said, Hyperice and Therabody and a lot of companies like that on the recovery side. And then, name, image, likeness, sponsorship deals, doing things in that way. I think that's sure. It came out hot and heavy. Hopefully there's going to be a little bit more regulation around it, because I think it's very dangerous. But I also think you're going to have a lot of assets to invest in on the human capital side that become interesting. You're already seeing, basically, I'm butchering the title here, but like private equity companies raising funds to buy out futures and contracts for athletes. But also you can see ones that are putting riders where they will start creating incubators for brands. So instead of going out and getting Nike to do a shoe deal, they're doing the Ball Brothers type, build their own brand that then can be licensed and added to products, right? Those become interesting if you can pick the right the right athlete to be able to underwrite them and have their brand build a portfolio that you can get, you know, your carry, if you will, or your percentage ownership in. So I think that's a very interesting piece. Yeah, I mean, because it's not our main thesis, we look at ones that we understand. And I think kind of in that recovery tech perspective, and on the data perspective is really where we spend our time. But I think you're going to see more and more, especially on the athlete side, get more involved in investable assets.
Yeah, and I think the heels heroes is interesting. You're seeing that on the women's sports with like
Mm-hmm.
Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese, all that. But
100%.
yeah,
But you know what it does is it gets the WNBA more press coverage. It gets
correct.
more eyeballs. It gets more. And when you literally think about it, what do media companies need? They need an audience. And so if you can paint a narrative, regardless if it's accurate, you will get more coverage. And so
Yeah.
that becomes dangerous, but also it becomes aligned because they're also going to get more coverage for themselves, higher contracts, higher sponsorship value because they have more media impressions. And that's really what this whole thing is about.
Yep. And then because we'll post this to the larger audience, you know, you do a nice job on socials. What are your socials and
Yeah.
the website as well?
Sure. It's solycocapital.com is our website. Instagram, it's Chris M as in Michael Van Dusen. And then LinkedIn, same thing. Facebook, same thing. I don't think I'm on anything else, but it's all Chris M Van Dusen because there's two other Chris Van Dusens who would have thought. And they are, one is a very famous children's author and illustrator, and the other one is the executive producer on Scandal and Bridgerton. He's the showrunner of that. So my small little social presence is not going to beat them, but you got to put the M in there.
Love it. Love it. Well, yeah, no, this was great. I guess if anyone has questions real quick, we got 15, 20 minutes, but you know, feel free, Wally, Bob, Keith, Michael, anyone. And then for the people staying, I know a few of you are building companies. We're going to keep this tight, but I'll give you 2 minutes to introduce yourselves and tell Chris a little bit about what you're doing and, you know, may pique his interest.
Hey, Pete, can I jump in here real quick?
Come on, Chad, anytime.
Chris, man, I'm just leaving your town from Huntington back up to LA.
Nice.
We'll look forward to getting together. But you mentioned Hyperice, and I'm sure you're aware of their collab with Nike with their Hyper boot.
Yeah.
Are you connected to Anthony Katz and those guys?
Anthony, no. Jim, the CEO, I know. And I think it's a remarkable product. I haven't seen it in person, but it was really, really cool to see that launch happen. That and I think it's a vest as well. And what I love about that company is just that they keep pushing and innovating and doing these type of partnerships. I think it's really interesting. But yeah, I actually have the Normatec legs. I'm big on recovery. I train and teach Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as a hobby. So at 43, I need to get those Normatec legs and everything iced and heated and laid out, or I don't get to walk the next day. But yeah, I'm fascinated by the recovery space, and I think they're a very interesting company. It's doing a lot of great things.
Yeah. We'll take it offline, but I mean, I come from that world, and I actually helped introduce Anthony Katz, who's a buddy of mine. He's out of Laguna, to Mark Sanchez back in the day when he came out with his first product. So been involved with them for over 12 years now. So we'll definitely catch up, and yeah, definitely I got a few things on this wearable technology recovery conversation.
That'd be great. Appreciate that.
Cool. Thanks, AP.
And if you guys haven't connected with Chad yet, everybody in the community, he is the West Coast Steve Sabo. And for all of you that don't know what that means, he's just a lunatic connector with a lot of good ideas and good relationships. So be sure to reach out to Chad in the community. Keith, I'd love for you to pop on, and I think you're doing some really interesting stuff with the VR technology. I think it's a good one to kick it off. So if you want to hop off mute and introduce yourself, floor is yours.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. I won't go through the whole history of Flex Coach, but we started out back in 0203 in the coaching education space and coaching technology, creating practice planners and drill designers and things like that. Our team is former athletes, coaches in the hockey space. Okay. And one of the key partners, a good friend of mine, actually a young man, I call him a young man, but he's getting to be almost my age, that I coached on a national team for USA Hockey many years ago. And we reconnected in Phoenix with the Coyotes. He's now the head coach in Pittsburgh, the Penguins. And anyway, we wanted to transition from coaching into athlete development. And it forced us, in order to do what we wanted to do, to create a very unique camera system that would allow us to capture 360 video from a first person point of view. So again, without monopolizing the time, what we now have done with that is we now, in addition to the training components, we don't have a recovery component, but we've got a preparatory mental prep type of component. We also have fan engagement and broadcasting, streaming media, etc., that we've spun out of, okay, the original concept of creating content and training young athletes. I see Chad just mentioned in the chat Luke Robitaille. So we have not connected with Luke, but if you've got a connection there, that's great. But anyway, that's a little bit about what we're doing. We're really excited about the potential because it's got so many different variations of what we can do off the core technology that's been created. And love to, if there's any interest.
Yeah, I'd love to chat. If you have a deck or anything,
Yep.
Andrew can get us connected and be happy to chat.
No, I
Great.
love it. And I think, as we go through this, we'll make sure that, dots are connected and, definitely want to use this time wisely. And Keith, I appreciate the brevity. But, let's keep it tighter to questions, more specific around, and then we'll expand outward and individual conversations. So, Mike, I know you're aggressively raising some capital in a really cool emerging space. I'm not sure if you and Chad Chris had a chance to connect at Hampton's Tech Week, but want to make sure that you get the floor just to introduce yourself as well.
Awesome. Yeah, we briefly connected. Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Yeah, thanks again. Great insights, great podcast. Just really, for a summary, Sweet Chameleon works with brands and IP owners, primarily in sports, but also gaming and entertainment, to reward their fans and monetize their IP through the development of these custom collectibles. So we leverage 3D printing technology and additive manufacturing to create these physical collectibles. No minimum order quantities, no inventory, an elastic supply chain that allows us to be in market within a matter of weeks. And all of our physical collectibles have a corresponding digital component, whether it be video, offers, AR, VR experiences, which are activated and authenticated from everything from dynamic QR codes to NFC chips. We have IP agreements in place with the NBA, with Major League Baseball, with the Formula One Alpine team, and more teams coming, Professional Tennis Players Association, and we are literally on the 1 yard line with the NFL and NFLPA. So amazing IP. Thank you. We have a B2B2C model. We can distribute wholesale as well as direct to consumer, and have a pretty aggressive product release schedule for the fall. And we are also in the market and have been raising capital at this really what's a pre-seed stage with about a third of what we're looking to raise either committed or in the door.
Congratulations. It's amazing.
Thank you. Thank you.
No,
it's awesome.
That's good stuff. And I think Mike, this one made a lot of sense on the emerging side. I know it's a little early, on the Solyco, but I think, the goal of all of this is to get visibility where we pull from Bob and Chad and Chris and everybody and try and pull the right eyeballs to it. So appreciate you sharing. And I think as we continue to move through these, we'll do more pointed questions where we can really get the juice for the squeeze, with our guest and, look at we're all learning as we go. So I think if there's any more questions for Chris, happy to open up the floor. If not, I think we'll take this one home and have many more amazing guests here in the future. So Bob, Wally, is there any questions that you guys have before we wrap?
Yeah, I just wanted to confirm with Scott his reference to a mantra that I've loved for years. We called it inch wide, mile deep, as it relates to staying in one lane of a silo. So if you were looking at 5 sports, focusing on one, maybe that's your strong suit, the low hanging fruit, just dial in on that initially.
100%.
Okay,
Agreed.
thank you.
Yeah, 100% agreed. And whether or not it's a sport, I think sport industry, whatever it may be, you may have the ability to go to all of them, right, at some point. But, we always looked at it from a SaaS model perspective, right? You may be selling to this industry. If you want to go sell to another one, let's say it's the insurance industry, there's already an incumbent traditionally. How long are those contracts? Right? When do they expire? How long is the sales process? Right? When you start unpacking, you might say, this is the best thing of insurance ever. Right? But if we started today, we wouldn't be in revenue in that industry for 18 months. But I need to hire these individuals to even get a chance to be in revenue in 18 months, which means if I only have so much money, I'm making an investment from a fixed cost perspective over 18 months with the prospects of getting that returned, versus I'm already in this market. I already know the cost of sale. I already know what staff I need to grow. I just need to execute over 18 months. Well, if I do that over that 18 months and show how we're going to do the plan, I go back to, there are people like myself who say, well, look what you did here. I know you can do it there. Here's your next tranche of expansion money, right? And as you do more of those, then you're actually now in revenue offsetting the burn from the original while you're taking your next piece to scale into, right, the next industry. And I think it's more prudent. There are certainly anomalies and times that it makes sense to go full court press in many, but I would say the majority, at least that we look at it makes more sense to be prudent, right? That inch wide, mile deep.
That's awesome. I think score break. I see you come off. We got one more.
Yeah. Just a quick question. Jordan Hendry from Scorebreak here. Chris, thank you very much for your time. Scott, Andrew, thank you for putting it on. Chris, for post-revenue companies, what revenue kind of milestone or marker do you consider kind of an early indicator of product market fit?
Ooh, that's totally dependent on market and cost kind of cost or revenue per product. But really, for me, again, it's almost like how long's a piece of string? And I'm not trying to be vague, but I'm sitting here thinking like, is this a consumable that needs to be rebought? Then I want to know what your perceived LTV is or your repurchase rate, right? And I want to see that. And even if it's a small cohort because you just launched and you're only doing $500,000 a year in revenue, right, for a consumable, but you have great market signals, you just need scale. That's a very different discussion than if it's a one-time purchase and you might have $1 million, $1.5 million in revenue, but it takes 3 months or it takes 3 months to acquire a customer or a very high, cost per acquisition. So I struggle with it from a definitive revenue piece to answer. I think it's totally dependent on the industry you're in to find product market fit. I think doing a lot of testing and a lot of surveying, and I don't know, I haven't seen a lot of companies that continue to do it at the pacing we used to, but like a lot of pre-purchase, post-purchase surveying. And so what I mean by that is there was companies like Qualaroo back in the day and others that we would use where when they're on their journey, if we saw that they came back to a website, didn't purchase, a few times, because we used to build big data warehouses, right? Personally at the companies that I ran from a direct to consumer perspective, we saw you come back and have that data, we might pop online, like on-screen survey to figure out why you're not buying, right? Like, give me that data. In the same vein, we would do a lot of post-purchase, right? Or if they hadn't come back in a certain amount of time on a consumable, why they're not purchasing. And I think those are all very important. And if you have that data, even if you have a small amount of totality and revenue, depending on your pricing, and can show the signals and what it's going to take and prove that we ran this, we found this, and here's what it's doing. We need capital to scale. That ends up being the really deciding factor, at least for me, as I'm looking at it from a diligence process perspective. Hopefully that's helpful. I know it wasn't big.
Yeah, no, it is.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Jordan,
Yeah,
also
absolutely.
let them know that go Pioneers. So Denver guy down there. So
There he is. That's
well,
awesome.
cool, guys. Well,
Scott, I had a quick fun question.
yeah.
Chris, what's a golf course in Southern California that you haven't played yet that you want to play?
Ooh.
I love Chad.
Yeah. So LACC, I've been invited a few times and have never made it work. That one's a big one for me.
Done deal. We're let's get out on LACC.
Say less. Let's go.
All right. Got it. Thank you.
No,
All
that's
right.
awesome. Well, listen, Chris, thanks so much again for your time. And, this is just the first of many live podcasts that we're going to be, starting to run for our community members. So, always fun to pop the cherry with a good looking fellow like yourself. So, so guys, thank you so much for hopping on. I hope you found this insightful. I hope you found this beneficial. And Chris, again, as always, man, thank you for being you.
Thank you very much, guys.
Awesome.
Appreciate it, Scott, Andrew, everyone.
Have a good one, guys.